Yeah, it's nice to meet you, first of all.
Likewise, thank you.
Yeah, the EP is so much fun to listen to.
That's good. That's kind of I guess that's what we want from it. Yeah, it's kind of like catchy pop kind of.
Yeah,
I don't know how to really. I always say that we're kind of like a punk influenced rock band.
okay.
It's kind of what I say because we're not really a punk band, but we're not really a rock. We're like a combination, I guess. This is how I see it.
Yeah, you definitely have the undertones of punk, that's for sure. Like with
Yeah.
the fast beats and everything.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, energy level, production. It's hard when you're making music and I mean I don't we didn't reinvent the wheel, We're obviously our influences are pretty obvious. Um, but we're really just trying to make good songs um that, that have good energy and we perform well. So that's really what we're looking for in that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so with cave pop, dance music for primitive people, that is a mouthful. With the album cover is really cool because it's like a gorilla. It's just cool looking.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, it's supposed to be like a caveman. That's what it's a caveman. We were kind of,
it kind of okay.
yeah, it's a caveman. Um, and it's supposed to look like a, old record from like the 70s
Okay.
that you would buy in a thrift store. That's where there's like tape and stuff on it. And you can see,
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you can tell from the small, eventually we'll press vinyl, but there's also, it's like if a record was sitting in a bin for a while and you could see the vinyl pressing through.
Yeah.
It's supposed to look super weathered from the 70s because that's kind of like a 70s design. Like they had like the kind of they put the songs on it for like more gimmicky type stuff that you might buy when you're a kid if you went. This is probably before your time, but when I was a kid, you would go to like a department store and they'd have a record section.
Oh, wow.
I remember there was a place when I was growing up, it was called Corvettes. I don't know if it was a chain or not, it might have been. And so I'm from Trenton, New Jersey, and there was a Corvette I would go to as a kid. I was like 6 years old, and I remember going up and we would just sit in the record section and look at the album covers. But yeah, it sort of harkens back to that. And the guy who designed it, his name's Orion Landau, and he's kind of well known in like the metal scene. He was the creative director for Relapse Records,
Oh, okay.
so he's done so many record covers for off the top of my head, Red Fang. What's the band he does now? Russian Circles.
Oh, wow.
I mean, like so many bands. I couldn't even. And he has a varied style. He also just happens to be one of my best friends. So, so I like pester him to do like artwork for me. So that was kind of like what we were going for with the record cover. Um, and I just wanted to come up with when we were like writing the songs, and we had started to write these songs just before COVID, and then we stopped playing for 2.5 years. And
Yeah.
so basically, because so I play the drums and the singer and songwriter James Salerno, he um he had just had a child just when COVID happened. So they were, your kid can't get vaccinated or anything. So they were just very concerned about their child getting the virus. So we basically just, they kind of stayed in the house. And then we started playing again, except minus our bass player who we had lost. We're always going through bass players. And we called our old bass player back that played with us a few years back and said, hey, just come back and record these 4 songs with us just to kind of get our momentum going again.
Yeah,
So when we were writing the songs, I kept thinking like, I think at the time I was listening to the band Idols a lot. Do you know that band?
I've heard of them.
They're like they're really interesting. They're doing really well right now. They're like they sound like to me they sound like 80s British punk. They're just a really visceral band, and their drummer, who I listen to a lot, plays these really prime. He's like a very well, he's very gifted drummer. He probably has like amazing skills, but in that band he plays sort of minimal, like tribal kind of drumming.
Oh wow.
So when I was playing, that's how I hear it. So when I was playing, I kept feeling like that's what we were doing a little bit. But I like funk beats, even though we were kind of like a punk rock band. I like to incorporate funk beats when I can get into there. So I just thought it'd be funny to have some kind of title for it, to call it, because I kept thinking it was like caveman music we were making, like poppy caveman music. Again, you could use that word for grunge music, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so it's like, I'll just come up with another word. And I thought, maybe it'll make it more interesting for people to go, oh, what is this? Because these days it's impossible. There's so many releases and it's impossible to get people to pay attention to what you're doing, right? So I kind of thought there's a couple of the songs are a little bit of a dancey undertone, even though it's, more straightforward, I guess, rock music or punk music. The last song on that EP, it's called Okay Now. I play like a James Brown funk beat underneath it all. And it sort of makes me think it's sort of this weird hybrid of like Britpop and grunge or something, like this weird. I don't like to use that word grunge. I wouldn't call my us that, although sometimes people say that. Although we get compared to lots of different people, lots of different bands. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of I just thought it'd be an interesting title, and it made me think of like Steve Albini, the producer Steve Albini. I don't know, he's like a engineer. He plays in this band Big Black, and oh, he plays in a band called Shellac, but he had a band called Big Black, and he had I feel like back in the 80s, there were like there'd be like records with these kind of titles, long titles. And so Big Black, they had a record that was like songs about fucking. That was like, and it just sounds kind of like, what's that? And it just makes you think about it a little bit more, and like there's maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more of a concept behind it. So that's why we titled it that.
Okay.
Just to
Now, what's that?
just to make it kind of more interesting, and like it was just like what I was thinking, and I was like, these are kind of like caveman songs. Oh, and I was like going to call it caveman pop, and then my friends' kids were like, no, you have to call it cave pop because there's K-pop, right? The Korean pop. So like we'll be like, oh, it's instead of K-pop, it's cave pop. We're like making a joke. So it's
Okay.
it's supposed to be satire.
Okay.
Whether people get that or not, I don't know. But yeah.
All right. So when you first saw the album cover completely finished, was there like any sort of visual going through your mind of what the caveman was doing? Like what is that caveman doing when he's listening to the record?
Oh, I kept thinking of that. It was like the whole time I was thinking, I don't know. Have you ever watched the Flintstones?
Yeah.
It made me think of like the Flintstones. Like it made me think. I remember there was like on one of these old episodes. Of mine, the Flintstones was coming out. They were making it in the late '60s and early '70s. I don't even. Maybe it was just the late '60s. I don't know. I mean, I watched it when I was a kid, but I don't know if they were making new episodes. But I remember there was this episode where there was like a band, a pop band. They were like supposed to be like the Beatles, but they were cavemen. So I kept thinking about that, like, the Flintstones idea of this. And I kept thinking about this cartoon that came out in the 70s that I used to watch called Captain Caveman. So I was thinking like that's who'd be listening to this.
Okay.
But then my friend Warren Landau took the cover, and of course he's like super metal dude, record cover guy. So then he made it more ominous, but he also just thought it was funny. So I was like, that works.
Okay.
Simple as that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so what is it like your base of it? inspiration for creating some of the beats that you create?
Well, for me as a drummer, people don't really ask you about that very much. 'Cause people don't really care about the drummer, right? But I listen to uh I listen to, I grew up listening to like 70s and 80s rock and 90s, and then in the 90s I was, got really into math rock. Um, but I also grew up with funk and soul and old school hip hop. So I sort of all these things kind of play into what I consider myself I really consider myself a punk rock drummer. That's what I always tell people. I don't know what that means anymore though. But what that means for me is that I'm self-taught, um, and I play like really primal, and
Hmm.
I try to be interesting a little bit, not over the top. My skill level is it's fairly advanced, so I'm not really like a punk rock drummer in the terms of my skill level. Not to say it's soup. I can't play like the drummer in Tool, nor do I have a desire to, or like Neil Peart from Rush or something. Um, but my skill level's a little bit past just like being the super primal, like, punk rock drummer. But that's kind of the energy and it's how I think and it's what I listen to. So like when they mixed this 4-song EP, the guy who mixed it is this guy, Stuart Richardson. Um, and he used to be there was this band from Europe. They kind of, in a way, they broke up kind of controversially, but I think what they called the Lost Prophets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the bass player. He produced all their albums and he lives in Florida. He mixed our last album. And he also is the bass player for the band Thursday. He tours with them. And then he has another band with the singer Jeff Rickley. I'm forgetting what they're called. They won like Kerrang album of the year. I'm blanking on the name. It's two of the guys I think from the Lost Prophets and Jeff, and it's like post punk. It's kind of like new wavy, new Joy Division, New Order sounding stuff. But any case, I wanted that this. I love Steve Albini, who I mentioned, the way he produces stuff, and that's a guy who did like In Utero by Nirvana. He did the early Pixies stuff. Um, just a massive list of people. But the two bands I wanted us to sound like on recording was Rocket from the Crypt and the Bronx. So I was like, that's the kind of energy, I was listening to things like, yeah, it's upbeat, it's kind of poppy. It's not like necessarily all that dark, but I wanted to have this crazy energy as much as we could. Like we had a limited budget. We recorded it at one place, we had it mixed another place. And I think he got that. So at the time, I was thinking a lot about those two bands. I like these two bands, Rocket from the Crypt and the Bronx, in terms of the production and just the way the drum sounds and everything. So did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So what are some of the classic punk undertones that you would say that Cyclone Static has?
Oh, that is really hard. I think a lot of people say we sound like there's definitely hear Nirvana in there because the singer has a voice that's similar to Kurt Cobain.
Okay, I could hear that. Yeah.
I've had people say that we are like pre-metal. Trying to think of this band that
Pretty metal.
I actually I think you hear a lot of 70s. It's hard to say. There's not like a particular band. When I hear us, I always hear like a lot of 70s and 80s, like rock in us, but like with a Stooges kind of energy. I mean, we get strangely compared to the Pixies, which I don't think we sound anything like. although there might be the loud quiet thing that they do. Um, it depends who's listening to it, but I feel like we sound like when I hear us, I actually think we sound like Cheap Trick, but they're not punk, but
Yeah.
like this kind of 70s really like raw rock music that like these days everything's really overproduced. So, well, with contemporary like mainstream rock or you'd hear on the radio, it's really overproduced. And I think those earlier bands weren't really like that. So I think we have some of that. I mean, I grew up listening to like 80s hardcore. Um, but I don't we more have the energy. I can't say when I listen to it like we sound like anyone. I don't really we sound like a lot of people, but not specifically like, a specific band. I'll put it to you that way. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know that I can really answer that question. I hear a certain thing that I always think of as being like I think of bands like Cheap Trick or like Thin Lizzy.
Hmm.
I feel like there's something going on underneath. But these days, I don't even know what that punk rock means anymore. Those bands kind of had a lot of punk energy, to be honest with you. Um, and they would then go on to influence these other bands. Not really 70s punk bands. I wouldn't really New York punk bands of the 70s. I wouldn't really compare us with those bands. But it's really I guess it's about the energy. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a with the EP, it's really cool because especially with the opening track, Boom Boom, that one is just like really it is something to dance to, that's for sure. Like if you were to see it live, like, like all I could think about was just dancing around in the pit. It's such a upbeat energy. And then with the last track, the It's Okay Now, that one kind of slows down the tempo a bit and it's more melodic and it's really nice. So like what was the vibe like when you all were recording Boom Boom and also with It's Okay Now?
Well, I mean, we recorded all that stuff out, well, we recorded it in a couple days and we do the drums and bass at the same time. And I don't play to a click track. You know what a click track is?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not a fan because I think it kills the energy of the music.
Yeah.
Our last album, we did that. And I think that, most people couldn't tell, but I can. And I feel like it loses something like this energy level in the way that the album. So I'm pretty well rehearsed, so I go in really well rehearsed and like not needing a click track. Not to say there aren't the band. We're really into like band older sounding the way people things used to do things and not to get that performance. So, but yeah, I mean, Boom Boom's a completely different song when we play. That's like a upbeat like it's like a hardcore song, even though it's not really a hardcore song. Um, and actually, when we're recording it, and there's like I do these tom hits, boom boom. I told Stewart who mixed the album, I was like, can you make it sound like a little bit like the ACD song Thunderstruck? I don't know if you know that song, but they're like they have these big.
Yeah.
I wanted it to sound like that, but yeah, it's a totally different thing. The last song is really different. And for me, it's like a Britpop song. It's like a rock. It's like a heavy Britpop song, like the Stone Roses or something from like this. Because back, in the '90s, there were all these bands that were like they were playing, pop music, rock pop music, but they were playing like northern, like soul music underneath it. And so I still think that song is like more, it's not like, I still think it's upbeat, but it's more like a song that there's a dance beat going on. Like when they isolated when I just could just hear the drums, I started to realize it was a James Brown dance beat. And when you take the guitar song out and it could be like a dance beat like that kids would break dance to. I don't know, maybe it's the same as Apache, which is like a Sugar Hill Gang song. It's like this same dance beat, but I didn't realize it for the months in advance that we were making the record. rehearsing the song, creating the song, because I'm not hearing it. I'm just hearing what I think works for the song. And it was an opportunity for me to sneak that in, like some kind of dance beat into the song while it's still a rock song. So, but it still has a lot of all the songs, all our songs sort of have this loud quiet, which is sort of a Pixies thing that Nirvana then took. There's this dynamics of energy. So it gets loud and gets quiet. So that song does that as well. There's this dynamic in it. Um, so for me, it's not fast, but it still has a lot of energy, and it's super fun for me to play. It's my favorite song to play on
Okay.
the of the four song. I think most people will like Boom Boom. They'll think it's the best single, and the second single we're releasing is Real Sign, which is just another kind of more. That's the real primal song, I think. Um,
Yeah, that's the third track.
yeah, but I'm thinking this last song will appeal to people in some way. Should be interesting. Hopefully, it does something.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really cool album, or EP rather, but you have released an album called From Scratch.
Right.
And that one, like, what were some of your, because that's your, just fact checking on this, that's your debut album,
That's
correct?
right.
Okay. So what were some of the moments that you remember most, like in the creation process, that really have stuck with you about
In the
it,
what process?
the creation process, and for
Well,
which,
well, the thing that's interesting about this band is that so I used to play in a band with a singer back in the 90s, and we were called Dry Water.
yeah, I read about that.
Yeah. And so I not to date myself, but I'm 55. I'll be 55 this year. James is 8 years younger than me. So when we were playing in that band, he was like 20 and I was like 27 or something like that. And we used to play at CBGB's all the time. And
Oh, how cool.
that was a younger, I used to work there. That's kind of how we used to get these good gigs. So we played
Oh,
all.
that is so cool.
So we used to get all sorts of, we used to play all of whatever the venues were in New York at the time. And then I turned 30, and I was living, I don't, where do you live?
I am in Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh, you're in Fargo. Oh, no kidding. I have a friend from Fargo. But I was living in Jersey City, which is like a borough, basically. It's like living in Brooklyn. And I decided to move back to my hometown, which is Trenton, which is about an hour and a half or an hour south of New York, to start my career. So I'm an art dealer. That's what I do. And I owned this art gallery for a while, and kind of people know me from that. But so then I came back to New York City. That was probably around 1999 when I left. I came back in 2005, and I owned this business in New York for 12 years, this art gallery. So I stopped playing music. And um, then I was probably like in my early 40s, and James and I hadn't spoken probably since 1999. So it was like 12, 13 years had gone by. And we found each other on Facebook. And he at this point had moved. He lived in Brooklyn. He was living in Jersey, got married, had kids, blah, blah, blah. And he works in the city. So we met up and had drinks. And I was like, "What's going on with you?" And he's like, "What's going on with you?" It's like, "You playing music?" He's like, "No, I'm not playing now." It's like, "You want to get to, we were just like, you want to jam sometime?" And so we started playing. And I hadn't played in years. And it was really just the point at the time was just us getting together, just the two of us, to just play music and write songs, but not without any goal or motivation of being a band. And then I bought a house so then I could practice in my basement. I started getting better, and we started to like flesh out some songs. We started to look for someone to play with. And after it took us a few years, and then we ended up, a friend of mine who I knew for a while came in and helped us pull everything together. This guy, John Matthias, who's played on this four song EP. And then we had a set. And so it was that album was really about us learning to play together again. That's why it's called Starting from Scratch. But also he went through a divorce and got remarried. Um, so it was really about us learning to play together again, and also us learning to play differently. I mean, our band sounds similar to the old band, but it's much more mature and different. Um, so I mean, that was really the whole thing was even though, we had played music before, we were starting all over. So we were, and we were approaching it differently, and we had different influences from what we had listened to before, different perspectives, different expectations. And we did the thing, you go out, you start playing shows, getting good shows, and then we got picked up by a small label, Mint 400. And that was that. It's the first time that I had recorded a full album. I'd recorded before, but not a full album. And we recorded it in a basement of the label that we're on. And so that was interesting. And I got to be very much involved in the process of helping produce it and learning that whole process and understanding that whole process, and which is, there's so many levels of it, and also watching my bandmates, and seeing what they brought to the table, and just kind of being surprised by the level of creativity and talent they have when we're collaborating that you don't necessarily see when you're just learning a song. And then when you go to record it, it's like, oh, let's do more vocals. Let's add this piano. Like the piano got added into the last song on the EP, Okay Now, which I thought was cool. I was like, we don't play it live like that, but sort of add this whole other level. So I don't know if there's a specific moment that stands out for me, but it was just a really good growing and learning experience, and just to be playing music for a long time, and then kind of getting to put out, I have a lot of friends and a lot of bands that are very successful musicians, and they were actually really supportive of me and helped me um produce it properly, get it out there, etc., etc. Like Jeff Rickley from Thursday and Davey Havoc from AFI, they would like give me feedback and stuff because they're just friends of mine, name dropping. But they were just like, oh, cool, Jonathan, because they know me as an art dealer, not as a musician. And so it was that experience for me, and that's still what that experience is for me. It's not like, it would be great if, you know, we put a record, we put an album out and it like got a lot of press, and you could really run with it. But these days the music industry obviously is very different, and um that doesn't happen so easily. But ultimately I enjoy the process, and that's what we continue to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a question. Being an art dealer, like, have there been any art that you have seen that's influenced your music or inspired it at all?
No, I don't think so, because I probably visual arts are inspiring my life all the time, unbeknownst to me. But I became an art dealer because I was really into music, and I started showing like rock and roll based art, comics and all this sort of thing. But when I was a kid, probably the thing that was the visuals that were most inspiring to me was album cover art, which is kind of a lost art, where you would literally just, you go in their record store, you had no money. I started doing this when I was 6 years old. I bought my first record when I was 6. It was the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. And I bought it because I love the Beatles. My cousin turned me on to them, but I didn't know what album to buy. But I love the artwork on it. The Beatles' Yellow Submarine. And it's not Peter Max, though. Can't think of the name of the artist. But like, so I'm sure there's visuals, because my life is spent focused on visuals. That's what I do. I sell art all day, and I manage a visual artist, things like that. So, but I don't really, music's a different thing. I mean, I guess I kind of visualize it, but I don't visualize it in in images that would be recognizable, you know? It's an interesting question. Although some other musician may tell you that there is something, but
Yeah.
they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm totally influenced by, I was thinking about Harmonious Bosch when I wrote this song and blah, blah, blah. I'm not a songwriter. I'm a drummer, I'm a collaborator, producer. So yeah, that's not what I'm thinking of, you know?
Okay.
It's a fair question though.
It's awesome though you're an art dealer because I mean that's what Damnation Balls is based upon is art and music, of course. So that's cool. I kind of read about that. I've had a lot of other I've had a lot of interviews set up this week because I was like, ah. But that's cool. Like, what are some art pieces that have really stuck with you that you've seen?
I don't know if the particular art piece sticks with me because I really don't. So I owned this art gallery for 18 years, and I used to represent a lot of sort of like pop artists, like underground artists and street artists. A lot of people know like one of the artists I used to represent was Shepard Fairey, who did like he does a Obey clothing line, did like the Hope Obama poster. Um,
Oh, okay.
he's like probably one of the most famous living contemporary artists right now. But I worked with like a lot of artists who would do record covers and did a lot of illustration and things like that. And one of the artists that at the time was interesting is I had a lot of rock bands that used to buy art off me. So and before Instagram and all this, they would find out about artists, I think, through my website in the early aughts, even to the late 2000s. As a matter of fact, I'm fairly sure that Mastodon, they did a video with an artist I used to represent named AJ Fossick. And I'm fairly certain that they know who AJ Fossick is through my website, through me promoting and marketing because he didn't promote and market himself. But yeah, so like a lot of the artists I would work with, I don't know, they were collected heavily by people in the entertainment industry. You know, who have I sold to? I used to sell to Madonna. I've sold to James Hetfield. I mentioned Davey Havok, Jeff Rickley, um, Adam Jones from Tool, Marilyn Manson, Shirley Manson. I can't even, you'd be surprised. But so, I can't forget. I kind of forgot the question you were asking me. I mean, I think the genre as a whole was very influential to me. I was super inspired by like basically like imagery that I was seeing in fanzines and like underground comics. And one of the first people I ever worked with was Frank Kozik, who just died recently. Do you know what I'm talking about? Frank Kozik's like the father of silkscreen rock and roll poster art, and he did everyone in the 90s. If you look
Okay.
his stuff up, and he just died. He was 62. It's really sad. Stuff like his really early stuff like his, while he's not considered like this high-end artist, his work really influenced me. Obviously, people like Andy Warhol, all the pop artists when I was growing up before, I was involved in this graffiti art, Keith Haring, just like this sort of populist work that wasn't really in the galleries, and it still does to this day affect me that way. I mean, you get a little bit more desensitized because it's what I do for a living, and I'm just looking at Instagram all day, and you're just like,
Yeah.
um, it's not like you go out in the street and you say, "Oh my God, I can't believe this mural." There's murals everywhere, But when I was younger, and all that stuff was really fresh, and people were like just like out in the street, like doing, this illegal street art, and there's only a handful of people. You'd be like, "Who's that? Who stuck that up? Who's doing that? That's crazy." It was so transgressive. It was so like it was like it was so rebellious. So that used to that spirit of all that is what inspires me. It's with same the art and the music, it's the same. Sort of like this punk way of sort of approaching it. Um, but I wouldn't say like, is there a piece? Like if you said to me, is there one song that's influential? I was like, no, it would never be that way. It's like a body, its whole aesthetic. Like, I mean, I could be like, I always have this questions like, who are your top five favorite bands, which kind of change. If you ask me, like, what's your favorite song by that band, I might be able to give you one, but I don't think like that. Like, I love that song, This Monkey's Gone to Heaven by the Pixies. That's probably my favorite song by the Pixies, which was one of my favorite all-time bands, you know. I
Oh,
love the Beatles, but I couldn't say there's like one Beatles song that was like the Beatles song. I love Fugazi. I could never pick one Fugazi song. It's really all about them as a conceptual thing as opposed to it's not like they're not writing pop music, you know. So
right.
everybody always plays Waiting Room. You know, I don't know if you know that song Waiting Room. It's like off their first album. And it's kind of like I'm so tired of that song. There's so many because it's kind of like their poppiest song in a lot of ways. But people play it in discos like it's a dance song, which is kind of funny. Um, but yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Okay. Well, cool. Yeah, well, those are all of my questions that I have. So,
Well, I
yeah.
thank you for your interest and
Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. It's been a very interesting interview.
yeah, sure, no problem. If you need anything, I'm around.
All right.
All right, have a good
If
day.
I
Oh,
ever put this out there, you guys gotta come play Fargo sometime.
oh, I would love to play Fargo. You know, it's so funny because I'd love to tour, you know, and we pretty much just play the tri-state area at this point. You know, we play New York, Philly, Jersey. You know, we'll drive as far as Boston or down to DC. That's pretty much it, you know, because we're not really like touring like we play, you know, fully touring. But yeah, I'd love to come to Fargo.